Welcome to the Love Justice Podcast, where we hear from different voices who are joining us in the fight against modern-day slavery. Here's your host, Hannah Munn.
Welcome to the Love Justice Podcast, where we share the ideas behind Love Justice's impactful work through conversations about fighting the world's greatest injustices. Today's episode is for anyone who wants to make a real impact on the lives of the least of these, beyond just good intentions. If you've ever asked how to meet urgent needs without doing more harm than good, or how to live out Jesus's call to serve the least of these in a world overwhelmed by injustice, this conversation is for you. Our guest is Peter Greer, President and CEO of Hope International, a global Christ-centered development organization serving across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. He's also the co-author of influential books like Mission Drift, Rooting for Rivals, The Spiritual Danger of Doing Good, and The Gift of Disillusionment. Peter brings both deep personal experience and rich theological insight to the question, what does it truly look like to help those who need it the most? Joining him is John, founder and president of Love Justice International, where our mission is to share the love of Jesus Christ by fighting the world's greatest injustices. Together, Peter and John wrestle with questions like, why did Jesus center the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized? How do we operationalize Matthew 25, helping those who need it the most, wisely, urgently, and without causing harm? How do we stay rooted in the gospel in the midst of the emergency of others' suffering? And how do we stay focused on the places of greatest need, even when the easier path, comfort, status quo, or self-preservation, tempts us to drift? If you want to help those who need it the most, this episode is packed with practical wisdom and spiritual clarity on how to do that, beyond good intentions and without losing heart. Let's dive in. Well, hi, Peter. Welcome to the Love Justice Podcast. We're so excited to have you here this morning. Before we dive in, I think what would be really helpful for our listeners is just a brief introduction to your story, Peter, and specifically what shaped your passion for serving the least of these and how that journey led you to Hope International.
Thanks, Hannah. And the story could take a little while, so I'll just give you 3 significant moments because you look back on your life, right? And there are those moments when you realize that there is a significant change of direction. And in my case, it was always because of a person that I met. And so the first of those moments was when I was studying as an undergrad. I was at Messiah University, and I was studying as part of the International Business Institute. And I had this strong interest in global missions and strong interest in business and entrepreneurship. And at that moment, I thought those were 2 separate activities. But I was in Moscow and met someone who, for the very first time, showed me how these 2 can fit together in a powerful and compelling way. He was doing economic development in the former Soviet Union. And as I listened to what he was doing, it was like these 2 interests that I had came together in a beautiful and compelling way. So that was a defining moment because it introduced me to this idea about global economic development and global missions coming together. That was one moment. Number 2 moment is after graduation. I had this interest to go and serve and do, and it was really hard to get a job. I wasn't even trying to find a job. I was trying to find an internship. I was sending my resume out to anyone who I could find and said, I'd love to get some experience. Is there any opportunities? And sent that out to 10 organizations and heard back from one of them. And the one that I heard back from was saying, well, keep your resume on file if anything in the future comes up, kind of a form response. And I was like, that's not good. But a few years later, met an individual named Clive Calver, who was with World Relief. And he was so kind. He was so gracious. He was speaking at a conference, and I came up to him afterwards and said, this is what I want to do with my life, everything that you just shared. And he was so kind. And that opened up a door for me to go to Cambodia with World Relief and then to Rwanda. And that really got me into this whole field. So that was a defining moment number 2. And then defining moment number 3 is while I was in graduate school, did a project on Hope International in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and just happened to coincide with the president of Hope International, who was there at the time, Eric Thurman. And again, such kindness. But he said, I'm going to be transitioning away from Hope and would be curious if you'd consider stepping in after you're done with your graduate studies. And that was 21 years ago when I joined Hope International. And so really my career, my interest and my career have aligned on this idea about using business as a way of serving the least of these by using tools of business and investment, helping individuals create jobs and grow enterprises as a way of working their way out of poverty, and for us doing it all within a very intentional, Christ-centered approach. So that's the journey. Those are three defining moments that have led me to this work that I get to do.
And I love how what you said at the very beginning of those three defining moments being marked by people that you met. And I think that God can work so powerfully through other people, and you never know when you're going to meet that person or when you're going to meet someone who will lead to the next defining moment. That's a very thought-provoking kind of thought that we could even talk more about at a different time. But I love that. I'm encouraged by that. John, Love Justice's mission is to share the love of Jesus Christ by fighting the world's greatest injustices. Why does LJI tie evangelism and justice together so explicitly, and why frame it around the greatest injustice rather than just the general good?
Yeah. Well, first of all, great to have you, Peter, and I really appreciate just the ways you've blessed me over the years, and yeah, what you shared. It is those moments when God's deft hand connects us with people that really shape our journey. But yeah, Hannah, you know, Jesus says, "Whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you do for me." And so, that's our target. That as an organization, I think as the church, those who we should be seeking to help are the neediest people, and that's the world's greatest injustice. The people who need help the most and are suffering the most. By definition, they need it the most. So we should help those. And that's what is one of our core values: help those who need it most. And our second core value actually connects to the other part of your question, and that's be the kingdom. Where we consider our primary identity is as part of the body of Christ. Love Justice is just a shell that will fall away. And ultimately we're working through churches, trying to live out the gospel and how we work and live and relate to one another. And we also very much believe in sharing the gospel. We feel that the message of the gospel and the words of the gospel is tremendously important, and really souls are more important than physical needs. And yet we're essentially, a lot of our work is focused on justice work. And we see ourselves as calling the church to love justice. So if the church is sharing the gospel, but they're not doing it accompanied by love and action that meets the needs of people around them, they're not really sharing the gospel, because the gospel is a gospel of love, and love is not idle in the face of people's sufferings. And so, yeah, I think that message of the gospel kind of goes hand in hand for us with trying to fight injustice, and particularly the greatest injustices.
Yeah. And John, something that I've always respected during my time at Love Justice is that we don't emphasize one at the cost of the other, but rather it's two things that come together that make, I think, our work so powerful and life-changing, and not just life-changing on this side of heaven, but also for eternity, which I think is a really hard thing to balance, especially nowadays. And it's just something that I've really respected about the way that you've led our teams, and particularly that area of our work. Peter, John referenced Matthew 25, where Jesus says, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." Why do you think Jesus places such a strong emphasis on those who are poor, orphaned, widowed, marginalized, and suffering? What do you think that says about the heart of God?
I think it's this beautiful way that for God so loved the world, every single person in this wonderful world, and in the way that the systems tend to work, that is not always reflected in the way that we as humanity value and treat others. We believe there are some with more perhaps worth in the way that we actually treat. We believe that there are some with more perhaps prestige or value. And I love that we serve a God who says all means all. All means no exceptions. And I think that heart of God to say there are some who for too long have been forgotten, who have not been seen as valued. And I think that is part of the heart of God is saying, those that the world has overlooked, I do not overlook. Those who the world have forgotten, I have not forgotten. Those who the world say do not have the same value, I say you have every bit as value as anyone else. And I think it is a correction. I think it is a realignment and juxtaposition between the way that the world tends to work and the heart of God. And I just love that. And it's embodied in the way that Jesus lived, almost to the consternation of so many of the people at that time. Jesus, who are you going to have dinner with? Jesus, we got more important things to do. What are you doing to stop in this moment? And I just love a realignment of the world, more in alignment with the way that God says all are loved, all are valued, all are created in the image of God. And I just want to live more in alignment with the way of Jesus. In the way that we go about our work. So, least of these are not least in the sight of God by any means.
Yeah. Peter, in a different interview that you did, you talked about the power of listening. And I wonder if that act of listening is one of the greatest honors that you can give someone, especially the least of these, in terms of like, I see you and I hear you and I'm with you. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that and just how hope serves the least of these.
Oh, it's so simple and it is so actionable. But I think the question as an organization are whose voices are you valuing most? And I think over time, it's really easy for us to listen and respond to the voice of donors. And that's an important stakeholder group, like those that give generously. It's really important to listen to the leadership team when you come together and you have leaders. And the challenge with that is sometimes the people that have the most to gain or lose based on the services that we provide, based on the work that we do, based on the way that we do it, it is oftentimes for organizations most difficult to listen to prioritize and respond to their voices. And so we've really tried to shift the way that we do monitoring and evaluation. We actually changed the name that we use. We call it listening, monitoring, and evaluation, so that it doesn't seem like cold or static. It doesn't seem like a research project or just quantitative tools to basically prove our impact. It is with an ethic of love that begins with listening to those that we serve. And so we have tools and approaches that try to realign all of the voices matter. We want to listen to all of the stakeholder voices, but we want to start to have our plans and our priorities shaped by those that we serve. And so we start there, listening with those that we serve. And there are a number of practical ways that we do that. There are a number of practical tools that organizations can employ in thinking about how we listen well to those that we serve. So, we think love leads to listening. Listening leads to knowing those that we serve, their needs, and that shapes an organization in a wonderful way. When we think about the future plans, the question is, are we starting by listening to those that we serve?
Real quick, Peter, three methods that you do to listening, and maybe like your top three, what would they be?
I'm super proud of our listening, monitoring, and evaluation team. It's one of the simple tools that we use is called Dream Catcher. It basically starts with what are the dreams of the families that we serve, trying to understand. So that is a tool that is used. Second thing that we use is called the Hope Quotient. And the simple Hope Quotient basically looks at the 4 domains of impact. John, I really appreciated what you shared earlier. It's like, let's look at this spiritual impact. Are people growing closer to Jesus, more fully following him? And then looking at the material impact. Are they getting out of poverty? Looking at the social impact. Are they growing in relationship and social capital with each other? And then the personal. Are they filled with more hope for the future on that? So looking at the 4 elements of that. And then the third, and this is maybe the simplest, but we go on listening tours. And this is something that when I first arrived in Rwanda, my friend Pierre brought me on. And it basically was like, we're not going to actually do the formal tools. We're not going to get the survey instruments. We're going to sit down in people's homes and say, would you tell me your story? And just listening tours. And the irony is that gets more and more difficult when you grow in an organization. The more senior you become, the more disconnected you tend to be with those that you are serving. And so we really try to fight back against that by saying we want to regularly go on listening tours. Just simply show up and listen to those that we serve. Tell me your story is a beautiful question that leads to wonderful insights of how we actually can grow and shape an organization as well.
Yeah, wow. That's a nice little nugget of wisdom, Peter. I even wrote down a couple of things as you were talking. I'm really thankful for that. John, one of LJI's core values, inspired by Matthew 25, and for those of you who are watching, is a poster behind John right now, and that is to help those who need it the most. John, how do you actually determine who that is? And what does it look like to operationalize that value in a world with so much need?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's a very simple formula for doing that. I think you have to face up to and learn about injustice and think deeply about it, study it, and I think listening to people who you know of, and just find a way to learn about it. And they're not the loudest voices. In fact, they're often the quietest voices, and so you have to really search for those things, and you look for, of course, those people who need help the most, but not just people who are in the worst situations necessarily, but the worst situation where you can do something about it. If you're a doctor and you're in a village where people are desperate, and some people are sick with something you can't cure, and some people are sick with something you can cure, of course you want it. The way to do the most good is to search for those that have the thing that you can cure. And so you want to look for a situation where you can actually make an impact. And it's like, if I have a little cut and it's like kind of infected and it's kind of hurt, just a hugely disproportional amount of my attention and thought and care and carefulness goes to protecting that little pinky. And so it is that's how we just naturally are, because if we assume that every person is as valuable as I am, is the person I love most, which we believe as Christians, that of course they are. We're all made in God's image and are precious in His sight. Then it's just very natural that our attention should go to that whoever is really in need of that help. And you want to search for the ones who are lost and can be found, who are sick and can be healed. So it's part of it is learning about injustice. Part of it is learning about what works, what is effective to actually make an impact in people's lives. And so I think part of it is learning about what has been done, and really how should we even think about impact, and trying to figure out what we can do to make the greatest impact. And what I would tie it back to when I think about impact is like, love would do unto others as we would have others do unto us. And so what would if it was my child, if it was me, which of those situations would I be the most desperate for? What would be the type of help, if I was in that situation, I could get this, that I would most want? And so, yeah, it's a really complicated world, and it's hard to do this well. But Jesus said, the least of these. And I think, of course, that applies to the people who are around us or who we run across. But in today's world, we know about things that happen all around the world. And so the least of these becomes a more complicated concept, I think, for us as a church in a globalized world. So.
Yeah, Peter, I'm also curious for you to answer that question. How do you guys at Hope also, determine who the least of these are, and what does that look like operationally?
I mean, real practically, there's 2 parts to the way that we make decisions about where we expand, and oftentimes at a national level, it starts by looking at some of the indicators. We want to go to the places of greatest need. So we look at the Human Development Index and identify which countries are in greatest need for the tools that we provide. And then the second piece is the Financial Inclusion Index. We want to go to those places that don't have the services that we provide. And so that kind of maybe is a little bit of a desk study project. But then we also are looking, and where's the invitation? Where, when we show up, are we meeting with denominational leaders or other individuals, and they're saying, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what we've been looking for. And so that really guides us, because you can't be everywhere, and we want to go. And then once we are in a country, I'm so proud of our global team, but we've had an initiative of saying, and within the country, who are the most underserved within that country? And so a couple months ago, I was in Burundi, and Burundi is one of the poorest countries on earth. But within Burundi, the staff identified that there is a particular group in Burundi that is even the neediest within Burundi on that. And so we said, how can we go and how can we serve that community? So even within a national context, we're just asking the question of who are the marginalized, who are the underserved? And again, as we were just talking about earlier, how can we make sure that we are intentionally prioritizing serving them? And so that's the way that we've gone about. The other piece at Hope International that I just so love, which is we can't be everywhere, but we kind of have a part of Hope that we've white labeled the products that we have, meaning the savings groups and the microfinance institutions, and created kind of a training component or an accelerator program. And so other organizations that are doing or want to do this, we love giving away everything that we have, coaching, equipping, supporting other organizations, because we truly do believe we are all on the same team. So in the places that we can't serve, we know there are other individuals that are already there, other church denominations or other organizations. And so anything that we have that would be helpful to anyone listening, we're always happy to share what it is that we've created, and take, tweak, adapt, use, implement if it is helpful in serving the least of these.
Yeah, John, there's actually some similarities with what Peter shared as to Love Justice as well, like the global numbers. I don't know what the reference is right off the top of my head, but looking at indexes and then prevalence of slavery and the openness of a country. Do you want to, I'm just curious if you want to piggyback off of that a little bit and share maybe some of the practical, tangible ways that Love Justice also finds the least of these.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of our early time was just learning about and coming across injustices, and then trying to figure out what can be done, and studying models. And and when I first learned about human trafficking in 2004, it broke my heart. And for years I would have said that it's the greatest injustice I've ever heard of. So we started trying to figure out what models to work. And there was sort of the prevention strategies that existed at that time that we knew of, as like awareness and job creation, and didn't necessarily have a tangible effect where you could point to an individual. And then there's the post-trafficking strategies, rescue and aftercare. And of course, it would be far better to prevent it from happening if you could. And then when we discovered this intervention, transit monitoring, that was invented by several organizations working along the Nepal-India border in the early 2000s, we were like, yes, this is the tangible prevention strategy that we wanted. And it took us years to figure out how to do it, how to scale it eventually we kind of learned how to do that. So now it's a similar approach. I mean, we use predictive modeling basically to predict impact on the dollar from all of our data from all of our transit monitoring projects. And it starts with a pretty geeky desk project. But then we have, of course, our regional stewards, and who are very relational, going in, trying to identify a champion in the country, building a relationship with them, and exploring the and you're looking for somebody who already has that heart. Maybe they already have a calling, and somebody who's maybe already either doing that work or has been praying about it. And then of course we would go in and start. We have a number of core processes that we would install. Hannah, you're involved in that, of course, that would sort of get that project launched off the ground. So, but yeah, I appreciate also, Peter, what you shared about your open-handedness with the things you guys have developed, because that stuff's precious and valuable, and you guys have invested a lot of time and thought into it, and that's your intellectual property. Just to be so open-handed with it, that is the right. And of course, that's the spirit of rooting for rivals. When I read that book, I was like, yes. After seeing the way that organizations in Nepal tend to kind of compete with one another, not and they're very territorial, but reflecting on the fact that, like, if I'm not in a mindset where I would rather have someone else, intercept 11 victims of trafficking than have us intercept 10, then my heart is set against our mission. And I need to have that mindset, and that it naturally. Well, I don't think anything about what someone other. I'm thinking about the impact that we're able to have, and that's natural. So I think it can so easily and automatically creep in to care so much more about the impact. But the kingdom mindset needs to be that we're in this together. I'd rather have someone else do more than me do a little less. So I just love what you shared there, and just your heart on that issue. So thank you.
Yeah, Peter, you have co-authored some very influential books in the ministry space, like Mission Drift, Rooting for Rivals, which we referenced earlier, The Spiritual Danger of Doing Good, The Gift of Disillusionment. In The Spiritual Danger of Doing Good, you talk about the dangers of doing good badly, how even well-intentioned Christian charity can cause harm. What are some of the common mistakes you've seen, and how do we avoid them while moving boldly towards need?
There's so many written or spoken on this, and I love the conversation. Some of the general principles that have been developed. I think the question of, are we doing for or with? That is a big question to consider. Are we assuming that we have the answers and that those who were showing up are going to be the recipients of our answers? That is a fundamentally flawed model and approach that never works. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about is just starting with the element of dignity, how we see people, and assuming that they are living in the situation. And if we are trying to solve all the problems as opposed to listening and learning and walking together, those just are better ways, I believe, of having long-term impact. So a lot of those principles, I would say, maybe if I could not answer your question directly, though, Hannah, I think we have a danger of the other piece right now, which is, I think unintentionally, there has been this message that we can cause harm with our good intentions. It's complicated, it's difficult. And I think some have used that as an opportunity to say, well, it's difficult. Jesus said the poor are always going to be with us anyway. So I don't want to do any harm, so I'm not going to do anything. And I think that is even worse than the previous. Like, apathy and inaction are the worst, as opposed to, even if we get it wrong initially, let's learn from that. Let's grow. Let's improve on that. So I would say, let's get in the game. You're going to do it imperfectly. Do it anyway, and just make sure you have a humble posture to listen, to learn, and to improve. But I don't think any of us have the option of opting out of the call to serve the least of these. I don't think any of us, if Matthew 25, if Jesus was serious in what he said, none of us have the option to say, well, I was worried about doing some harm, so I saw the people in prison, and I don't know what would have happened if I went and visited them. So I did nothing. Like, I saw that there were people who were hungry, but what if this created some dependency? So I didn't do anything on that. Like, I don't think that is a viable alternative. So let's understand it's difficult. Let's understand it's complex. Let's understand sometimes it doesn't have the intended outcome. Let's have a humble posture, and let's learn. Let's be excellent at making sure we are listening and learning. but let's make sure we are leaning in, not leaning back. Let's make sure we are having a default of action, not apathy. Let's make sure we are doing everything possible to say wisely and intentionally, let's go and follow in the way of Jesus and show up and care and respond to those who are in greatest need.
Okay, so I'm gonna lead this next question, which is an off-topic question with a little bit of some context. And that context is my first introduction to Love Justice was a vision team. And that was an 8-week trip to Asia with the organization, simply with the posture of exposing us to the work and the issue. There was nothing that I did in that 8 weeks that made a difference to anybody in the country that we were visiting. Although my college mindset was, I'm going to serve. I want to serve. Jesus called me to serve. I'm going to go change lives. Here we go. And left me changed. That country changed me. And those people in that country changed me more than I could ever or will ever change them. And I think that was a really hard lesson for me to learn, is that it's actually not about me. And there's so much that God can do in that well-intentioned heart of, I want to go. And what that ultimately led is to me serving with Love Justice for 10 years and ended up working with the organization. But that initial trip, from a perspective of impact, had no impact on anyone in that country. So I'm curious, thinking about who potentially could be listening in our audience, where does spiritual discernment come into this idea that we're talking about, which is doing no harm, getting in the game, serving the least of these? Like, where do you pair the spiritual discernment with the very practical kind of lessons and tools and monitoring and evaluation and listening? Like, I'm just curious, Peter, to hear from you first on where you see those blending together, what advice you might have to people who want to get in the game or don't know where to start or how to do it, and how to listen really well, I think, and how to really be humble and posture themselves before the Lord in that.
I don't think your story is an anomaly. My experience is almost everyone that is involved in this work had a similar experience. And you can read about global poverty and you can read about helping those who need it most. But until you have gone and see and experienced and had your heart deeply touched and moved by the people and the situations and the context, I think it's real hard to actually have that. So I would just say, I wouldn't be dismissive of the experience. I just would reframe them as you have done, and I think all of us have done, that call them what they are. These are educational experiences. And just like we don't critique a class that we take, that we took a class on, fill in the topic, we didn't maybe apply all of that in that context, but that was an important building block. I would say, similarly, this is an important experience. It's an important way of connecting with others, of learning, of having friendships, of growing, of having our eyes and our heart opened, of praying for God to use that in really remarkable and significant ways. And for those that haven't had the opportunity to go, I would say go, like, experience it. Just make sure that it is done in a dignifying way with an organization that has a long-term presence on the ground, and making sure that kind of the baseline is that you're not going to harm those that you are going. And there are some simple ways to do it and to maximize the good of the educational experience that it is. So I would say go and experience and do it with a trusted organization who has a long-term presence on the ground. That being said, then how do you go through the discernment process? I love the Terry Looper book, Sacred Pace. That to me has been so helpful. But he identifies these 4 areas of how we actually go through the discernment process. And for those that are trying to take that next step of, so what do I do now? He has this wonderful thing that involves gathering the facts, and the research and education is so important. And it involves consulting Jesus in prayer. It involves friends and trusted advisors. And it involves getting your heart neutral so that you truly want the Lord's will more than your own in that. And so I just think that's a wonderful way to say, go through the process of having your heart and your hands open. And physically, I oftentimes find myself praying a little bit more with my hands open, like, Lord, guide me, lead me, show me what it is that you want me to see. Show it me what it is that you want me to do in that. And so, yeah, I would say go see and then explore what it is that God might be inviting you into.
It's funny that you say this, Peter, because we have Terry coming on the podcast later this year. And his book, Sacred Pace, is literally sitting on my desk because they sent it to us ahead of time. So that's a good little teaser for a future conversation, which will be really fun. And John, I think that with this next question, we'll also hear from you on that, so we can kind of tie both of those things together. But one way that we help those who need it most is by do no harm, even when the urgency is high. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by do no harm and how you lead a team that holds both emergency effort and wisdom together, especially in our program work?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I appreciate what you shared, Peter, and I agree. We all start out just bumbling our way into things, and ultimately, like it is. Um, I don't know what I don't know what it is, but I think it is about discernment. I think it's about a posture of humility. It's about listening and learning, and it's also about as soon as you get involved in with trying to really impact people's lives, it's really easy to start thinking of yourself as like as a savior, and it's really important to be right about that. I had a moment that I often talk about early in our work where I was working with this a deaf street child, and I thought to myself, if I don't help this kid, no one will. And then I felt God just rebuke me and say, "No, I have this situation under control without you. No sparrow falls outside my care." And that was really important for me to really get out and to just humble myself and realize that I was being blessed to be a part of what God was already determined to do. So, I mean, but the reality is, like, you know, the world's greatest injustice is the situation of the least of these is for them an emergency. Like it demands a level of urgency. People are desperate for help. So we need to we need to get in the game. And yet on the other hand, it's so easy to do harm. So there's this quote by Rick Warren that I'll quote him. I don't know if I agree with it, but it's at least a helpful kind of frames the problem. He says, having traveled the globe for 30 years and trained leaders in 164 countries, I've witnessed firsthand that almost every government and NGO poverty program is actually harmful to the poor, hurting them in the long run rather than helping them. And that's he writes that in the introduction to The Poverty of Nations. And I don't know if I agree with it, but I will at least say that, like, I've seen how easy it is to do harm. I've living in Nepal for 20 years. I've seen a lot of work by NGOs. I've heard a lot of the effects of that harm, and I've just seen that it's more common than I ever would have thought or known. And the short way I would explain the reasons for that is because of the prevalence of corruption and the prevalence of abuse. And often when you're trying to help people, you end up trying to put vulnerable people in someone's care, and they can end up being abused. A third is like learned disempowerment. That's a real thing. And then the fourth is there's this wide cultural gap, and it's so much wider than I ever would have thought. Like I when I was 1 year in Nepal, I thought I knew everything about living in Nepal. And at 5 years, I was like, okay, I don't know. So after I'd lived in there 20 years, I just came to a point of, like, definitively, I know nothing about what is going on relative to the right nationals. And if anything, I just learned how little I know about it, how hard it is to discern things across culture, and therefore how important it is to have the right nationals and to, empower them to make decisions and to lead. But so in light of all these ways that I've seen that we can do harm, kind of the first thing, it's just like the physician's adage, first, do no harm. It's one of our global values. Of course, that doesn't mean don't do anything. But if you are going to do harm, it would be better not to do anything. But also, you're never, like you said, Peter, like no one gets into this in any other way than by making mistakes. And so, it's a really hard thing to discern. It's like in medicine. I mean, you wouldn't, certainly don't do nothing for people who desperately need something, but first do no harm and then try to figure out what you can do to help. And so, yeah, and there's a situation where something is desperately needed, and yet, do you have this obligation? That's a hard balance to find, but I think it's both. Get in the game, but be really intentional about and really thoughtful and really careful, because it really would be better if you are. I mean, and I say this as someone who has done harm, but through my work, through decisions I've made practically every mess of things and walked into every pitfall under the sun. In so doing, I learned, and Love Justice was born out of those mistakes and became what it is out of those mistakes. But certainly in those situations, it would have been better for me to have not been involved than to have done that. And so we don't want to make the most vulnerable people our learning ground, so to speak. So I don't have an easy answer for it, Hannah, but I do agree with what Peter's saying. Just I would say to anyone, get in the game. But you just have a posture of humility, have a posture of care and carefulness, and listen to people, try to really understand things, find wise nationals. You really need the right, like you said, long-term presence on the ground. People can really help you discern things. So yeah, it's a really challenging but really important question.
One thing I would probably add to your list, John, is knowing when you don't know and acknowledging that and working with that baseline.
Which is basically all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then surrounding yourself with, a team. One thing that we briefly touched on was that idea of emergency effort, and how John talked about, like, if it was his pinky, he would summon all of his resources to fix his pinky. And the least of these, or what we talk about in Love Justice, is what would we do for the least of these as if it were the person that we love the most, and how that creates a sense of urgency in the work that we do. But Peter, I'm curious, in your view, what does urgency look like when it's rooted in the gospel? How do we keep it from turning into burnout or that savior complex that John referenced earlier?
I guess the thing that comes to mind, Hannah, is we tend to over-index how much we can accomplish in a one week trip in the places that we serve, and underappreciate what can happen in a generation. And so I think one of the important pieces that I think avoids the sprint that leads to a wall that leads to I can't do this long term is actually changing our time horizon. I think we need a longer term time horizon, longer term relationships for real significant good to happen. And again, tying it to the previous conversation, if your time horizon is 1 week, that means we got to go in and we got to do as much programmatically as we possibly can. We don't have time to listen because we've got to do. We don't have a time to sit and have tea because there are urgent needs that we got to respond to right now. And I think that is the wrong time horizon. I am much more interested after doing this work. I am much more interested and intrigued by the generational impact that we can see in the places where we serve. And that requires a much longer term perspective. It requires changing from the short term trip to who's going to be on the ground, who's going to be there within the community, long term commitments. And so I think that's one way that can shift that. And ironically, this is what we believe about poverty alleviation, is that's one of the most important things. A short-term mindset has to be changed for progress to happen. If your only time horizon is how am I going to eat today, you are not going to be able to invest in the crops, in the future, and there's a lot of reasons why time horizon is short if you're living in a place of poverty. But I actually think both in problem and in intervention, we can unintentionally shorten time horizon, which does not lead to the most important pieces of long-term health growth and success to truly break generational poverty. And so, maybe that's one piece to consider is how might we have longer-term commitments? How might we have longer-term interventions? How might we have longer-term approaches that really do result in lasting change. And again, with that long-term time horizon, then we can tweak when we realize something isn't working. We can course correct when we realize that it's not having the intended impact. And I just think good things grow in those longer-term relationships.
Yeah, there's a quote that Gary Haugen has, which is the work of justice is a long walk of obedience in the same direction for a long period of time, which very much correlates with what you're saying, Peter. And I wonder, and whether or not this actually makes the final editing cut or not, we'll see. But I wonder, or a thought that I'm having as hearing you talk, is this idea that yes, like we are working with emergency effort for the least of these, but at the end of the day, like God is responsible in some ways for like the outcomes of some of these things, and we're a part of the work that He's already doing. And there is almost, I think, an element of grief and lament that comes with this isn't happening as quick as I want it to, and this world is very broken, no matter what we do. And we hope obviously to make an impact, and we're striving to make an impact and do good and not harm. But at the end of the day, I think there is just this surrendering to God for, we've done the best that we can with the time that we have, but at the end of the day, this is still in His hands. And I wonder if that is part of that posture of we work as hard as we can with the time that we have given, within our natural limits of a work day or a working week, but then surrendering it to God and say, like, ultimately, you love the least of these more than I could ever love the least of these. Like, take care of the least of these, Father, because this is what I have to give.
Any of our shoulders are strong enough to carry the weight of all that is wrong in the world. We can't. There's too much. Our hearts can't take all of that. I love at the end of the day saying, Lord, you do love more than I can. You do see every single part of the brokenness. You are there. You are at work in the midst of it. And then again, hands and heart open, and show me the place that I could be involved. Show me the place where I could show up. Show me the people that I could walk alongside and share and show your love with. But we cannot carry it all. I think this is one of the beautiful pieces that those who engage in long-term, effective poverty alleviation or global missions, I think they are those that have figured out how to practice Sabbath, which is 1 out of 7, letting go and being reminded God loves more. You do not last the duration without that habit and practice. I think those that can come to the end of the day and say, I did my part. I wanted to serve with excellence. I wanted to serve with passion. I wanted to serve faithfully. And to know, though, that there is one whose shoulders are so much stronger. There are one whose eyes see and whose heart is with everyone. And I think that is a difference in the work that we do, that we know we do not work alone. We do not believe it is all on us. And we have this incredible privilege of being invited into what Jesus told us to pray for, is thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And isn't it amazing? We get to see little glimpses of that kingdom breaking in. We get to be involved in little ways of that incredible work of redemption in our world. Mm-hmm. And I call it a privilege, but not the full weight of responsibility for all of the brokenness of the world. Yeah, that is above my pay grade significantly. And we know God sees, loves, cares every single one.
Yeah. And I think the shadow side of that posture is almost recklessly diving into work and then being like, okay, God, it's up to you to bring the fruit. And, at the end of the day, it's on you. Like there's a shadow side to that good side. And I think, again, what the least of these needs is both tangible love in action that is impactful in changing lives, while also paired with that surrender and that dependence on God. And I think, John, this is a good segue to talking about another one of LJI's values, which is to treasure impact opportunities. How does that shape the way you think about programs, priorities, and even team culture at Love Justice? And maybe start by sharing what is treasuring impact opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I came to this conclusion, and I think we as an organization kind of realized that, like, being based in Nepal for 20 years, having, dozens of staff whose job is to try to find opportunities to make a life changing impact, kind of helped me understand how hard it is and how rare it is to find those opportunities to really make a significant impact in someone's life and with that and avoid the harm, especially to find something that's like that's scalable. And so we kind of, it's not easy to find them, and but I want to say, when you do, like, when you find that good Samaritan moment, where you meet someone lying on the road, you have an opportunity to change the trajectory of someone's life. If there's $1 million in a bag over there, and one of those opportunities over there, I'm fully convinced that, like, eternity will reveal that the $1 million bag was nothing, but those opportunities are more valuable than any treasure. And so we want to treasure them. We want to search for them like treasure. We want to realize that they are rare, hard to find, and exceedingly valuable. And then we want to always be thinking about them. We always want to be looking at them, or looking for them, and just always having our eye out for them. So I just, we want to, I think we as Christians, we as a church, we should really strive to see those opportunities that way, and to just search for those opportunities like the treasure that they really are.
Yeah, I appreciate that, John. And that's so good. Peter, it's easy for organizations to get distracted or to drift towards easier work. How do you think Christian leaders and ministries can stay focused on the greatest injustices, the places where people are suffering most deeply and unjustly?
I believe in the power of asking questions. And I think it is a very good question to ask periodically, organizationally, where, not if, are we getting off mission? I think that is a good question. It is starting with the assumption that drift happens. It happens a lot. So where, not if, are we going off mission? And then number two, where, not if, are we starting to go down a pathway of playing it too safe and not re-risking for the sake of the gospel? The gospel is inherently risky. Doing this work to help those who need it most, that is inherently risky. And I think that over time, we got to make sure we are being willing to re-risk and to not follow the gradual, but it seems like almost inevitable path towards safety, towards comfort, towards an inward focus, organization over outreach. We got to be real careful that we are regularly reflecting, where can we re-risk for the sake of the gospel?
It's probably our natural inclination to drift away from that. And that is more of the natural tendency, or the knee-jerk tendency that we have. And so it is that constant, like, reorientating and making ourselves obedient to that truth. Because if we don't, I think we'd naturally just do that all the time.
Yeah, no, well said. Yeah, and the other piece, again, when we're connected to a global team, which I think is one of the great gifts of being involved in this work, is reminding ourselves, whatever our bubble is, there is a lot more out there, and the gift of friendships and having those conversations cross-culturally is so much fun. Last week, I was in Rwanda and Kenya, and had a conversation. It was on this exact topic, Hannah. But who else could we serve? Like, who are the pockets that are the most challenging? And one of the things that we got to see is a group of individuals that were all in their, I think, I mean, it's not appropriate to ask age, but they were in a latter stage of life. And it was beautiful because they said, in our context, these individuals are not commonly served with these types of, for us, we're helping people start small businesses. And they say, that's not typically the group. And we heard unbelievable generosity. We heard this gift of people coming together, and it was so inspiring. But in that context, they were like, this is a new area. This is a new group that is not served, and let's go serve. So I guess I give that as an example to say those closest to the work are going to be able to answer that question better than those of us that work in support functions. And so again, listening and asking questions, I think, will shape organizational outreach and behavior in a wonderful way.
Yeah. Peter, as we come to a close, many of our listeners care deeply about justice and faith, but may feel overwhelmed by the scope of suffering in the world. They might feel overwhelmed with what is the next right step? How do I get in the game? What would you say to someone who's asking, where do I even start?
Oh, I think that the three classic steps are: one, learn. I mean, the fact that in some ways that might be a false question for those listening to this podcast because they're already on the journey, right? They're already saying, I am interested, I want to learn, and are showing up. And I would say just keep doing that. Learn about the organizations. And then two is pray. I really believe that God guides us. I really believe that prayer is this deal where it's not just presenting everything that we would like to God, but actually giving a little bit of time and space to say, and Lord, would you guide me in this process as well? Connect. So I would say learn, pray, and then be on the journey with others. Go and spend time with others that have a similar heart. If you are doing the journey alone, it will be a much different experience than if you actively and intentionally seek out others who have that same heart to say, let's do something in our world. Let's make an impact. Let's actually read Matthew 25 and then let's do what it said on that. Let's figure out how our gifts, our abilities can be involved in helping those who need it most. Be on the journey with others. And so I think if you do those three things, my guess is you will have plenty of opportunities to figure out what it looks like to engage in effective and meaningful service in your community and be involved with organizations that are having an impact around the world as well. So that's what I would say. Learn, pray, and go on the journey with others.
Yeah, and I just imagine a prayer of like, Father, help me to live out Matthew 25 in my life. I don't think that the Lord's going to let that go unanswered. I don't see a world in which that would go unanswered. But what I think it requires of us in that prayer is remaining expectant and being vigilant of, okay, where then is he answering that and who I'm meeting with? And probably similar to what you shared at the very beginning of this, of just the people that you met along the way that changed the trajectory of your life, Peter, that probably those interactions, I would imagine, probably came after a prayer, a prayer for direction or discernment or, help me get into the game. Where is that? And I feel like I can resonate with that too, Peter, of even with a little bit of my story and being at Passion, hearing about human trafficking at Passion for the first time and just saying like, Lord, I'm all in, like, where can I go? And then learning about Tiny Hands, that same day. And then that was the snowball effect of like, okay, now here we are. And it didn't matter what qualifications, it didn't matter if you had the resume. I mean, obviously those things are important, but I think at the end of the day, if you have a willing heart and you're ready to go, God can do a lot with that. John, as someone who's built a whole organization around helping those who need it most with emergency effort while doing no harm, yet treasuring impact opportunities. I'm going to say that one more time just because that's so rich. As someone who's built a whole organization around helping those who need it the most with emergency effort while doing no harm, yet treasuring impact opportunities, what's one thing you hope every listener would believe or do differently after truly embracing the call to help those who need it the most?
Honestly, Hannah, I was thinking about when you said that prayer, that Lord, help me to do that. Help me to follow Matthew 25. And I can just imagine there's some listeners who are like, it's just such a simple prayer. Like, why? Of course, but I can imagine that it might feel kind of scary to pray that, because Hannah is right. God answers that prayer, and He will answer that prayer. But I want to say this. I really do understand, like, that feels daunting. It feels like he's gonna take something from you, and it's gonna hurt, and it's gonna, and that's probably kind of true. I think God does ask us to sacrifice, but I just want to say, like, you will be blessed in this life and the next so much more, to such a degree that it will make that thing that He took away from you seem like nothing. And I say that because, Jesus promises whoever leaves home and family and fields for the sake of the gospel, will inherit 100 times what he left in this life, in this age, and the age to come. And I left my home and family 20 years ago and moved to Nepal. And honestly, like, and it says, and along with those, and he says more fields and let's see, fields and friends. You'll promise more of that, and along with it, persecutions. And I can tell you that that's true. We went through a lot of hard things in Nepal that at the time were really, really hard and really, like, traumatizing hard. But, like, on a whole, in this world blessings that I've had, to be able to be a part of something so meaningful, to be able to see the impact that we're able to have, to be able to be in community with people like you, Hannah, and other Love Justice staff, and to be on this shared mission together, it just makes that sacrifice look like nothing. And I'm like, and so I've come to a point of, like, that promise really, really is true. And it's made me start to think, like, what if all of God's promises like that are true? Because, of course, God does again and again ask us to give up things that feel scary to us, and we're scared, but He promises blessing. And I'm starting to get to a point of like, I really think He means that. So in terms of what I would say, to every listener, take everything that you are and that you have with your life and in your life, and make the greatest impact you can. And I think that all of us should try to do that. It's all there in that one word, impact. It's all there in that one command to love. And of course, like, harm is a negative impact. So maximizing impact means, of course, you're minimizing harm. And I want to say, like, what we sacrifice, our intentions, how something makes us feel, those things don't matter to the target beneficiaries of our charitable work and giving. All that matters to the least of these is that they are truly helped and impacted. And so I would just challenge everyone, with your giving, your volunteering, your work, your vocation, and with your life, diligently, thoughtfully, faithfully, humbly strive to make the greatest impact you can in the lives of the least of these. It's kind of obvious that that's the ultimate purpose of man and why we were put on here on this earth. We call things good because they accomplish their intended purposes. A good scissors cuts well. A good car is good because it's good at driving. That's the purpose of a car. But like, when a good person is a moral person, a person who impacts other people's lives in positive ways, who loves others. And that tells us something about our purpose. At the end of their lives, we'll all regret many things that we valued too much, but we'll never regret the good that we do for other people with our lives.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Peter, for joining us this morning. I know that you are probably a man in high demand, and so thank you for being generous with your time and generous with your wisdom. And we just appreciate the friend that you've been to the ministry. And it was just a pleasure getting to know you a little bit more this morning.
Thanks to both of you. Great to be together. And yeah, just anyone who is doing this work on the journey together, we are friends. So grateful for your friendship and the work that you do in this community as well. So thanks so much.
Amen.
We are grateful for the generous support of the Love Justice community. Please consider joining our family of donors. Learn more at lovejustice.ngo.